We are live. Good evening, everybody.
Hello and welcome.
Something just happened to Sam.
No, because we weren't actually live when you said we were, but good evening, everybody, and welcome to tonight's conversation. We have with us a very special guest, to me as well, from a personal perspective, because Sarah's been my teacher and coach and explorer of who I am for the last couple of years now. And we've invited her here because we thought she would be somebody that could offer us massive value for you guys on all things from making good decisions to living in alignment with yourself and why that's important, and kind of exploring the topic of emotions and feelings, because I think we can often get stuck in our feelings, and we can withdraw and tend to try and avoid certain feelings. And so we thought we'd get her in and pick her brains and get her to share her wisdom. So, Sarah, why don't you start by just introducing yourself? Let us know a bit about who you are.
Okay. I'm Sarah, obviously. I've done a lot of stuff, but probably what we'll get into a little bit is being in alignment with who we are. Part of who I am is to try things, learn things, get kind of good at them, and then get bored and move on. And there's quite a lot of us like that. I suspect in the coaching world there are a lot. So I don't really mind the fact that I've started from the beginning a few times. So I've got too many qualifications, they're boring. But I've worked in IT consultancy. I've worked in IT in the financial sector, which is basically a bit like being a punch bag for a long, long time, because everybody in the financial sector hates IT but needs them, and that's not a good place to be. I taught Pilates, I taught massage therapists, so I learned a lot about anatomy and physiology, so how we work from the ground up. And then I bit by bit sort of moved into a more coaching arena, although I'm a very untrained coach, which suits me ideally. And I'm always exploring all kinds of directions, but more and more what I've realized is I want people to be happy, basically happy, to feel the full range of emotions, but to be happy with what they're doing, how they're living their life. And if we are happy, we make other people happy, and we make the world a better place. And any intellectual structure, any understanding, any of those things that you feel like you want to put little quote marks around, all of those pale into insignificance between being happy in a way that is for the greater good. And if we can all achieve that by ourselves and with our clients, then we're making a positive contribution. And once I realized that, that's been, for the last probably 7 years, that's probably been the single biggest factor for me in everything I'm doing is, are we enjoying it yet?
Awesome introduction. I now have many questions and that are likely to fill the conversation. I think the one thing that came up for me there, Sarah, and knowing you as well as I do, I'd love to hear your take on this. I imagine there'll be people in the comments asking the same question. If you are, guys, please do ask questions, because we're totally open to having them here. Is how do you be happy? Like, what is happy for you? What's your definition of happiness?
There's a number of different words, and if you're in a more spiritualized hippie woo community or more religious, I think grace is a great word. If you're in a more scientific community, fundamental well-being is coming up as like the favorite word. And both of them mean the same thing. They mean living with a basic sense of being okay with how things are, even if being okay with how things are includes campaigning to change how things are, includes a mishmash and a changing picture of peace, kind of unconditional love, freedom, joy, a sense of having enough, not of overflow, but of like sufficient, enough and a tiny bit more. and of compassion. In most cases, there are a few very specialized religious groups where they kind of lose all sense of humanity, but that doesn't appeal to me. I know people who teach in that way, and they're welcome to go there. My spirituality and my practicality are the same thing. They're totally grounded, they're totally down in the earth, and they're totally ready to sit with somebody and cry with them if that's what's necessary. There's nothing in being happy that is fake or hollow or structured or trying to achieve it. It's not, if I work really hard, then I'll be happy. It's coming back to who we are and how that who shows up in the world. And very much now I hyphenate that. It's like self in the world. It's not two things. It's not self plus a world. It's a self in the world as an expression of whatever our deepest or strongest understanding of pure self is.
I remember when I first heard you say that, and I was like, I don't get it. So anyway, I'm going to drop this and go and make some money. and over the time that we've been speaking, what's become more and more obvious is that what you're pointing to there, the beingness, that point of which we are being, that's always what we are, and then coming from there, not to somewhere. And it's very subtle, but quite profound.
Well, it's subtle because you've not really moved, but it's profound because it's 180 degrees different perspective.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of people in the field I mostly work in who are a little bit, with no disrespect to them, because their experience has been one road to Damascus realization, bright light, know who I am, everything's perfect. That's not the norm. The reason those things get written into books, the reason it got written into the Bible for Saul's conversion to Paul, is because they're unusual. Most of us have some kind of glimpse of some kind of oneness, beingness, isness, presence, some overflow of compassion. And then there's bills to pay and children to put to bed, or cats to stop fighting. I told you there'd be cats, or something. And I've been working with so many people over the last couple of years who have come to me and said, well, so-and-so told me I wasn't allowed to make money as a coach. And I'm like, and does so-and-so have problems paying their bills? We need to be realistic that most of us are not going to have this grand realization and go off to a nice religious community where we're going to be looked after and meals are going to be provided and somebody's going to make sure everything runs on a schedule. Most of us are in the world as it appears. And that deserves a bit of respect, and it deserves a bit of attention, because we've lost sight of who we are and how we show up. We've got very, very good at trying to be someone else. And generations of teachers have learnt this for themselves, and most of us do learn it by going down this route and coming back. I tried to be, there's a British teacher, Rupert Spira, and I had a genuine belief at a certain point of development, I would be slow and calm and measured, and my metaphors would be elegant. And it turns out I talk too fast. I move at a great speed. I circle round. I can start a story, and with my grandmother's ability, 25 minutes later, I'll finish it. But we will have gone to all 7 continents on the way. And somehow it will come back to where it started. And once I stopped trying to be Rupert, I did a damn sight better job of being me. And sometimes in the personal development field, particular modalities can sort of try to shoehorn people into a version. Well, you'll be a great coach if you get up at 5 a.m. every morning and journal for an hour, or you have this particular really expensive time management diary where you're going to spend your whole day ticking boxes and colouring things in and moving tabs about, or whatever it is, instead of recognizing the uniqueness and the variety of humans. And as a coach or helper of people of any sort, falling in love with the uniqueness of humans is the perfect expression of that slightly rarefied beingness, isness, presence.
Sarah, how do you allow yourself to do that? So I'm thinking about, there will be coaches in this group listening who are doing exactly what you did with Rupert, right? Like looking in someone else's lane, seeing everything else that's going on over there, seeing that they seem like they're further ahead, quite successful. How, like, what is it that you see or know now that allowed you to find the confidence to stay in your own lane, to get out of Rupert's lane? Like, can you share a little bit about that so that coaches might be able to, like, really, I think there'll be people really resonating with that and going, yeah, I know that, but how do I find the confidence in myself? How do I be okay with all of these feelings and get back in my lane?
Yeah, I guess I did have some preparation for the fact I was never going to be a good Rupert, because when I was about 18 or 19, my first degree is theology, and my college, was being a purely academic, normal university college, shared half of its building with the Church of England Training College, and they used to teach trainee vicars how to talk like vicars. And for some reason, the guy who ran it decided to let a group of us go on his How to Talk Like a Vicar course. And I think I was the first person to ever fail the How to Talk Like a Vicar course, because apparently I wave my hands too much, I look all over the place, I don't sleep, because a vicar is meant to talk like this. And honestly, it bores me to death. So I had some
school for vicars.
School for vicars. Oh, they learn. And some of them were allowed to do a degree, but a lot of it was learning pastoral stuff, you know, like how to talk to somebody whose husband's just died and stuff like that. And they were great people to hang around with, and they had a nice common room than us, and we were allowed to sit in it if we didn't mess it up or steal the newspapers. So I did have kind of a warning for that. I'd also heard one of my great teachers, Dickon Bettinger, explain how he'd made a very bad George Pransky, who was one of his teachers, and how, so there was a theme coming here that people were pointing out to me how they tried to be somebody else and how it hadn't gone well. Obviously, I like to try stuff for myself. I am the kid that if you said that's hot, don't touch it, I'd touch it 3 times just to be really sure exactly how hot it was and how much it would hurt. So the first thing is that sort of that growing body of evidence that trying to be someone else is never a good thing. And the next one is a very deep-rooted sense that if you are not authentic, even if you're making shed loads of money, you're not going to be happy, because it won't be a true expression of yourself. So you're always, and when you're not a true expression of yourself, you're basically at war with yourself. It's not like you can suppress parts of yourself in order to be a better you. If it's not holistic, you're at war with yourself. And being at war with yourself, money is great, but it's not going to make you happy if you're not happy with yourself. And then the next thing is starting to find modalities that suit me for understanding myself. So, for example, I've been working a lot with a thing called human design at the moment, which has a spiritual foundation as far as it's got elements of I Ching, astrology, Kabbalah, chakras. So, but it's a very synthesized system, and it gives you a nice chart that looks like an electrical circuit diagram. And a lot of, when I've talked to people who deeply understand this stuff, they say things to me like, well, you might need time to, oh no, you won't. And I'm like, time to what? She's like, well, different people need different amounts of time to integrate new information. I'm like, really? Oh yeah, because I had that boss who, like, you had to say everything to 10 times before he got it. And she can look at my chart and she can say, well, you don't have a huge need for integration. You hear new information and you're like, yeah, okay, next. Yeah, okay, next. Which is incredibly annoying for people who don't learn that way. So one of the things I learned was, oh, just because it looks easy and simple and obvious to me doesn't make someone stupid if they don't get it. It means they learn differently. And so obviously through years of teaching, I developed different ways of helping people learn based on how they learned better, because I've always been very outcome focused, which in some spiritual communities is a dirty word. You're not allowed to be outcome focused. You need to be in the moment. You need to just play. Like, no. Like, somebody goes into the race to become president of the United States, they want to win. Somebody steps onto a rugby field. Why would they not want to win? If you decide to have a family, why would you not celebrate having a child or grieve not having one? It makes no sense to me to not engage. And in my remedial massage training, we started to be introduced to a whole load of orthopedic techniques for tests. And all these tests are designed to induce great pain. And I got in so much trouble because I'd say, so what will we do differently now we know they've got this huge pain? And they're like, oh, nothing. It's just a test. And so we're going to really, really hurt somebody. And then we're going to do what we were going to do anyway. It makes no sense to me. The same way that if somebody's desperately, really, really, really wants to improve their marriage, but everything they're doing is they need to hear my truth. They need to this. That. It's like, you don't want to improve your marriage. You want someone to validate you. It's all of those come together in a combination that says, if, as the foundation of my work is, that if we know ourselves clearly, we are happy. And then why would I start pursuing all sorts of things that the world tells me will make me happy when knowing who I am is already happy? It's not one thing. It's not a nice tick box.
So how would you, it's a different flavour of what Lisa was asking, actually, and it's slightly different tangent. It's kind of like, how would you know if you're not being you? You know, for somebody who's listening to this, they're going to be thinking, well, they might be thinking, well, I hear you, but how do I know if I'm being me? I know that was a popular question for me when I was doing this exploration, or when I was exploring who I am.
Yeah. Some of it comes down to starting to not have that blanket term of feelings, but actually start to see that some things are emotions and some things are mental states and some things are intrinsic fears and some things are more intuitive knowings and some things are more inspirational knowings. So it can really help when we take the lid off that box and we unpack it a bit. But secondly, if you are not working in alignment with yourself, I say alignment because it just means being in alignment with who you are at every level. If you're not, it's going to show up as variations on frustration, bitterness, kind of agitation or aggression or disappointment. And disappointment can often turn into shame or blame, depending on other aspects of your conditioning and personality. So it normally shows up as, and those are kind of mental states. They're not brief emotions. They're something that persists. They're a pattern we get into. But if you're looking out at the world and resenting it for being the way it is, because it's not bringing you what you want it to bring, you're not in alignment with yourself. And it's that binary and that simple. And it can still take us years of beating our heads with a hammer before we're ready to accept that our ideas are what's wrong, not the world. And then when there are things to change in the world, we become a lot more effective because we're not so caught up in what it means about me. Like that, we're not looking to the world to validate us. We're not trying to find our sense of self in relationship. So yeah, it's as simple as knowing what it feels, getting a little bit of a glimpse of what it feels like to be in alignment and start to sort of pull that out to say, well, do you feel satisfied? Do you feel successful? Do you feel happy? Do you feel peaceful? Or do you feel bitter, frustrated? So on.
Yeah.
And becomes kind of like, you know, those cars that get really good at knowing where the lines are on the road and they sort of bump you back in if you drift.
Mm-hmm.
Great fun to drive, especially around Scottish country lanes, to see if you really can go around a corner, no hands. Answers yes. It's a bit like that. It's like a nudge back in. Like when it starts to feel grotty and grimy and nasty, the chances are you've gone too far into fixing, managing, coping, and you've not first looked at where you're doing the fixing, managing, and coping from.
What would you say is people's biggest challenge or blind spot or block to being and living a life and growing a business that is in alignment with who they are? Like, what do you see?
What's the biggest block? In general, it's the amount of energy we put into thinking about ourselves, about what it means for us, about what other people think of us, about how it should look. All the should, would, coulds. That's the biggest block. And that's not our fault. We've been trained into them from when we were tiny. We've been trained into things. And anybody who's gone through any nice coaching school, they've learned loads of great stuff. But if they've learned those as rules for how they need to be, as opposed to tools in a toolbox, then they've basically, you know, that really kind of corny phrase about outsourcing your power. It's that we've outsourced our sense of self to, I'm trying to think, there's one coach I've worked with quite a lot, and bless them, every time they get a nice bit of feedback from a client, they send it to me. Like, look at me, I'm really valuable because this client sent me a nice email. And it's like, yeah, it is nice. It's lovely to get good feedback, but that doesn't validate who you are. You are who you are, and that is its own validation. But I think a lot of coaches set out often with the best of intentions to pass on what's helped them, rather than seeing the person in front of them and recognizing that what's helped them may be the exact opposite. And a lot of coaches set out with the best of intentions to kind of heal themselves through others. And that's the thinking about yourself all the time. But they can all, when we find a more stable foundation, we're not going to spend as much time looking to other people for validation. And I think that that's where a coach switches from struggling to thriving, even if that thriving might be having a full practice, or it might be realizing, actually, I want to spend 1 day a week coaching and I want to spend the rest of my time doing other things. So it's not about following anybody's pattern. And I think that's one wonderful thing about coaching. You can have one client and you're a coach. You can work a 70-hour-a-week city job and be a coach. Like, there's no rule about how it shows up. And the more people get in tune with where their happiness sits and how they express it and what energizes them, it's going to be a hell of a lot easier than following somebody else's rules about what they should be doing.
There's something that me and Lisa often talk about, which is exploring, not taking things personally. You know, and actually we're doing a workshop after this. Steve, I mean, I know you know Steve Chandler, but he talks about it quite a lot on the social and the professional self. And it's almost what I'm hearing you say, it's almost most of us operate from what we already understand about ourselves up and to now. And we kind of don't see the freedom we have in this moment to choose differently, to be differently, to not have what we know define the conversation we were having with somebody that's right in front of us. And I think that's helpful because it takes the pressure off the coach to be like, I know that what's changed in me, and therefore I want this person to have the same experience. That can cause a lot of pressure. So it's almost, I mean, quote me if I'm wrong, but it kind of sounds similar to what you're saying, is that actually just being with that person right now can be one of the most helpful things that they could do for somebody else.
You know, sometimes it's sitting with somebody who's crying. Sometimes it's telling someone to pull their finger out and get on with it. Sometimes it's asking somebody to look in a mirror and work out what the hell they're doing with their life. It's amazing how beginning with yourself and knowing your foundation and being really stable in that. And nothing's off the table then. Steve's a great guy. He's an incredibly successful business coach. He's worked with so many people over so much time. And yet he's also the sort of guy, he took time out to send me a message to tell me that he'd bought a copy of my poetry book and he was now giving it to all his clients and all his family. So new clients were actually getting a copy of my poetry book when they started working with him. And that's a guy who, poetry is probably not part of his formal coaching practice, but that joyfulness and that openness and that embracing of what comes up means that, things flow. And I think all of us, it's like, if we know who we are and we're stable, we can go out from there to rescue people, or we can sit and call them to us. We can teach them practical tools. Now, I'm not above teaching people basics of anything I know about. If there's a practical skill they need that we have, we show them it. Because nobody raising a kid doesn't teach them to tie shoelaces and hopes they'll work it out for themselves. I think the strength of a coach is in a stability that's flexible. Some people say it's like being bamboo. It's got good roots, it grows strong, but it can move in all kinds of directions. It doesn't break. And a good coach does that for people. A good coach provides a really safe space for people to find out who they are and to start expressing that. And for example, if a client has never learned how to express anger as an adult, when they first get in touch with a feeling such of anger, they might become quite aggressive. They might start to want everyone to hear their truth and feel like people need to be told. And so being given a safe way of learning to flex the muscle of anger, to express it in a way that is creative and productive rather than destructive, can be incredibly powerful. In the same way a physical trainer will help people rehab from an injury. There's no difference. It's like if we do it physically, we do it in the coaching arena. We're always looking at, is there something they're not seeing? Is there something I can suggest which is going to let them open up new possibilities? So that there's a very much an enabling role. So that there's just no rule, as far as I'm concerned, how a coach shows up.
Yeah, it's really, I don't know about you, Lisa, but I think that would be useful for people to hear. But if it isn't, don't worry about it. There's an intuition piece there. Just do you kind of thing, right? Mm. Sorry, Lisa, I think you were going to say something then.
No, I totally agree with what you're saying. What you're talking about, what I heard, Sarah, was the foundation that you're coming from. Like, there's so much trust in that foundation that the intuition is free to just express itself through us. And sometimes, and this again, it's like really innocent. And I remember doing this when I was first starting out, thinking that I needed to have a list of questions up my sleeve, or like pinned to my wall, and really not being in a position of trust that my intuition was going to give me anything. And I had my story running in my mind around, no, my mind goes blank. It does. It's done it many times. It will go blank. And that being a bad thing. And so just really, lightening up and learning to trust in the intuition and seeing it play out in so many other areas. It's like, oh, it's there. And the thing that's keeping me from accessing that is this pressure that I'm putting on myself. No one else, no other external environment is doing this to me. It's just this pressure. So I wonder what happened. I wonder what would happen if I just learned to relax a little bit. Like really learn to relax into this and see what comes, and just playing around with it. But yeah, I think, and again, it was like, for me, that maybe that was my intuition, right? Saying you need a list of questions, like do what you need to do to make yourself feel safe and have this be doable. So if new coaches are kind of watching this, feeling really uncertain and nervous about, it's all right for you, you've got years of experience, you know, there might be some resistance to just showing up authentically, being present. That doesn't feel enough for a lot of
Oh, it isn't.
coaches.
It isn't. I really detest modalities that are like, oh no, you've had an insight, off you go and share it with the world. You just have to be present. It's all lovely. No, honestly, you can fuck people up that way. Sorry. A good coach will, their first day, will have a list of questions, will have like all the tools of their toolbox spread out, will probably talk too much or not enough, will lose track, will panic, will finish calls and think they're an abject failure, because that's part of the learning process. You're putting yourself out there in an incredibly vulnerable way. It's not going to always be pretty. So I think being prepared, being trained, having access to lots of different ways of working is incredibly important for a coach, because there's a lot of well-meaning people out there who are honestly leaving people in a terrible mess because they've given them the solution and then the person isn't feeling better. So then they've gone, oh, well, I'll give you my solution louder, because that's the only thing they've got. A good coach never stops learning and never stops growing. And we've all been there to a greater or lesser extent, where the first time when you realize, yeah, I'm just putting myself on the line because I think in conversation with me, your life is going to improve. And a coach is going to do that over and over again. They're not sitting in their nice ivory tower kind of, I don't know, scattering words of wisdoms like rose petals. They're getting down in the dirt with every new client every time. It's like starting again every time. And I don't resent that. I think that's actually kind of quite important. So yeah, showing up with presence is lovely as an idea. But actually, if my surgeon shows up with presence, great, but I want him to show up with a medical degree, years of experience, a great track record, and a scalpel.
Some tools.
Some
just
tools.
his bare hands.
Yeah, some tools. And when I taught Pilates, the can't even think of the word, studio that I worked in, the person who ran it was a student teacher. So she worked with students who'd passed their first exams and were progressing to their final exam, which was a practical exam. But she used to disappear like for a month at a time, even 6 weeks, to Australia twice a year. That's quite a lot of time out of a year. That's almost 3 months. Whenever she did, she'd just leave all her students to me. Now, each of the 110 exercises these students needed to learn was about a page of A4 notes. Yeah, detail, dense. And when a student is new, they're teaching the class and they tell them everything on the page. So for example, they'll be like, breathe out, roll your spine up off the floor. And about this slide's paragraph, like 3 minutes later, they're like, and now breathe in and roll back down. And the clients are like, the ones who are good at following instructions. And then when you can see as a student gets close to their exam, they're like, breathe out, roll your spine up off the floor, now breathe in and roll back down. Okay, next time we're going to concentrate on keeping ribs heavy, as an example. And then when they're watching it, they're probably literally got their elbow on one person so that the person who's doing the worst thing is being held down, but they're giving a verbal instruction that works for 3 people whilst encouraging 6 others. And most coaches luckily only get 1 person, but what they've done is they've realized one instruction, one thing. And a new coach tends to want to give their client everything, whereas a much more experienced coach kind of goes, what's the one thing I want you to take out of this? What's the one thing I want you to look at differently? What's the one thing that's going to be the next step on your journey?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting for us as coaches to look at that as well, because there does feel like there is a rush in this profession to get to a certain level and almost an expectation that my income should look a certain way, that my client base should look a certain way, and not necessarily that path to mastery. So that's what, what I'm hearing is there's a dedication, there's a practice. It takes time to learn to become a yoga instructor. It takes time to learn any craft or any skill. And in coaching, it can really feel like a lot of new coaches come in and then expect to be here and give themselves a really hard time when they're not.
And you genuinely, in coaching as much as a physical thing, I'm using that as an example because it's a nice little step distant from what people are doing. But when a confident coach doesn't need to show what they know, they speak what's relevant for the client in that situation. And sometimes that's one thing. And sometimes that one thing is, don't worry, we're in this together. Sometimes that one thing is, you need to go away and work out how much money you do actually need to be earning, whatever it is, because the more we're in tune with the client and what's showing up for them and what's going on under the surface. And so your example of your mind going blank, maybe your mind going blank is a gift to you, because then you say, wait, there's something that's not on the track I thought I was on. There's something different. And a coach also gets very good at saying the stupidest thing they can imagine. Like the worst thing that you can possibly imagine coming into your head is probably going to be the right thing to say. And sometimes that is, you do know at some point you're going to have to get over yourself and get on with this. Sometimes I've sat with clients and gone, what's the song you used to sing with your mum? Because it's popped into my head. This person probably sang songs with their mum and there's something in that. Turned out it was Bridge Over Troubled Water. I've no idea half the time why I've come up with what I've come up with, but the more confident you are, the more you're willing to make a fool of yourself. Because it's not about everybody going, oh, look at you, you're a wonderful coach. It's about making a difference in people's lives. And I think a lot of our structures, whilst they give us great tools, they help us forget why we started. And we all started to make our lives better and to make other people's lives better. And at a certain point, we've got to come back to that and say, is showing them how clever I am going to make their life better, or is it just going to validate me for a few minutes?
I think sometimes that.
Sorry, you guys.
Sorry, I was just going to say very quickly, I think sometimes that comes down to just a misunderstanding of what a coach is or who we are. Like you said, Sarah, sometimes the most powerful thing is when there's nothing to say at all. It's whatever it is that's true, whatever comes up. So Lisa, you go.
No, it's similar. It's the word simplicity just keeps coming back. And when we're talking about Steve, it's like, watch him at work. There's nothing overcomplicated there. He asks really basic questions. Like, can you help them? Yeah, go do that. I don't know. Go find out. There's nothing overcomplicated about what he's sharing. And we as coaches can really create complicated stories that stops us in our path. And it can be as simple as just helping someone see if it's feeling too complicated, maybe you're looking in the wrong direction.
Yeah, and it reminds me of that, that old joke about like the plumber, and there's a boiler that doesn't work, and the old plumber rolls up, takes one look, picks this huge spanner out of his toolbox, goes thwack, and the whole thing starts up, and then gives them a bill for £600. And they're like, well, anybody could have hit the boiler with a spanner. Like hitting the boiler with a spanner, that was £5, 595 quid, the 25 years of experience that put me in a position to know which spanner, where to hit and how hard. And I think it's a bit like that. There is a huge learning and growing process for a coach from their first client, and that's cool, that's okay. And if we remember why we're there and what we're trying to do, and it's not about us, it's about the client, it becomes a lot easier. And learning about people and learning about different ways of working and learning how different people are and starting to look at different ways we make decisions can be really helpful. Because if we're pushing one way of making a decision on people, so like I have a great guttural response. Like if you suggest something to me I don't like, I'm like, no. And I kind of can't hide it. Some people do not have a reliable gut reaction. So there's no point a coach pushing getting in tune with your gut reaction to somebody who does not have a reliable gut reaction. We have to get in tune with the client. We have to get in tune with how they make decisions. We need to understand their emotional pattern. So I was talking to somebody the other day, and it just happened we were talking about their emotional pattern, and I was suggesting what was going to happen is they were going to get this surge of energy and then a tip and a crash. And rather than fighting it and trying to work like this, they actually planned their work so that they actually found out that as well, they noticed that their pattern follows a kind of lunar cycle, which a lot of us do. And that if they plan their work, that they basically do a month's work in a crazy rush, and then they have 3 days of sofa time watching, I don't know, home edit on Netflix or something. That's good for them. They can, I don't work exactly like that, but I can do more in a week than a lot of people can do in 3 months. And then I sleep. 1 January, I watched How I Met Your Mother, all of it. Every single episode within a month. Because I'd flattened myself, and this particular person was about to plow through a day of admin when they felt shit. And when they realized, yeah, actually, the admin can wait 2 days and I'll do it in 5 minutes rather than spending 6 hours slogging. The more we're in tune with our own patterns, the more we get in tune with how our clients work. And some of that is analysis and some of that is conversation. The more we get in tune with different people's energy patterns, emotional patterns, decision-making patterns, mental patterns, the more we can help them, because the more we can help fill in the gaps, help join up the bits that really work well, help, and that's probably why you two work together so well, is that there's bits of each of you that sort of jigsaw puzzle together. And so some coaches will find they're brilliant by themselves, and some coaches will find they'd work so much better as a team. And so understanding ourselves in the world and understanding our clients is vital on an individual basis.
Yeah, I love that. I love that because there's so much, we touched on this, there's so much freedom within coaching. So when it comes to growing your business, you know, we tend to look at, well, I could work 3 weeks out of the 4 in this month, or, you know, Sam and I are looking at, we could do a 13-month program because we want to take Christmas off. So we look at really practically, lifestyle wise, what do we want to create for ourselves? But none of that was coming from a tuning into our energy levels. You know, do we work better in the morning? Do we work better in the evening? And where you're pointing to is really being in touch with yourself and those energy flows, which is really cool because there's so much freedom to create a business that works around that too. I love that you pointed to that.
Yeah, like a lot of us have almost limitless energy when we're doing what we love. Now, I've got a kind of weird mix of skills. I can do a really good job as a PA to somebody, but it drains me. I don't love it. And if I'm feeling low, I'm going to look for things that are going to validate me, and I can end up doing really stupid stuff. Whereas what I love is talking to people, helping people, working out what's going on for them, helping them see what's going on for them, helping them come up with their own creative solutions to what's going on for them, helping people stop going down a dead end, you know, turning round, coming back, reassessing, seeing what we've learned, moving forward, all of that. And you're right, you've got to start with a practical foundation. There'd be no point you running a program that had you doing 6 hours a day every day, including Christmas Day. From a practical perspective, there'd be no point you giving away everything you did, partly because nobody would value it and partly because you'd still have bills to pay. It's finding that balance of all of it, and it's understanding as well, I think. A lot of old business models said, oh no, you need to look at your return on investment on this and on this and on this and on this. It's much more holistic than that now. It's not so much work-life balance, it's how does work and life show up together. It's as an overall offering, with my free stuff, with my paid stuff, with my high-end stuff, with my low-end stuff, does it come together in work that satisfies me, that I can see the value of, that delivers what I want from a business as well?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this call as well, Sarah, because you've gifted us this time, which is, we're hugely appreciative of it, but it points to that, doesn't it? It's, all three of us are here on a Tuesday night, almost 8 p.m. And we're here because we choose to be, because we love what we do. Now, if this had been 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night and I was in HR still working for someone else, I wouldn't have this expression on my face. I would be feeling really resentful. So I love what you're sharing there too. Yeah.
And we can overlook those basics. We can overlook the basics of our energy flow, our patterns, what we're not only good at, but love doing, how we get into situations, because we're all different. Some of us work much better when we're invited in. And the great thing about being a coach is you're invited in. Some people work much better inspiring others. Some people work much better at delivering stuff. And it doesn't mean we can just reject all the stuff that aren't high on our list, but it gives us a way of working with people, of integrating with people, and of how we work for ourselves that is coherent, that matches our strengths, our capabilities, and our preferences. Because we can get to a point where we think we should be okay with this or that because we've got this ideal of a coaching business. But we're not looking at the sort of the on the ground, am I enjoying my day? Or am I constantly checking my watch? Is it nearly over? Is it nearly over? And we're all different. And some people work way better in structured environments. And some people work way better in fluid environments. And one is not better than the other. And there is all sorts of ways a coaching career can take people, because basically we're just helping people. We're all, as coaches, people who learn fast, universalize what we know so it's no longer personal, and share it appropriately to help other people.
Perfect summary. I think we're kind of at time now, Sarah. I can't believe it's 50 minutes we've been going. What a rich conversation. Well, it's one of those conversations where it's been so engrossed. You talked about watching the clock, and I just looked at the time and I was like, my goodness, it's gone so fast. Is there anything that you think we've missed that you'd consider to be important to mention as a closing message to a group of newish coaches?
Yeah, the thing I would say is that all of each of our life experience is valid. We can bring all of it, depersonalize it to a certain extent, but everything that we have learnt up to now is useful. Everything that we've learnt up to now is valid. And if you have something that brings great joy into your life, don't leave it out of your coaching practice. If you're very musical, if you're very creative, like whatever it is, bring it, because you're not trying to be an identikit coach. You're being you. You're being the fullest, the most joyful, the most accessible, the most appropriate, the most aligned version of you.
Awesome.
Perfect.
Thank you so much, Sarah.
You're a star. And if people want to find you, which inevitably they will, what would you suggest that they do?
They can find me on Facebook. there's a picture of me with like makeup and hair and stuff, but it's my name. So you can find me via Sam, obviously. You can find me on my website, which is that name, spelt that way. Trying to spell it other ways won't work. Yeah, those are probably the main ones. Facebook, via Sam, website. And anybody who follows anything I do will see I just bring everything, and I don't care how stupid it is anymore.
I can vouch for that being very true. Which is one of the things that we love about you, Sarah. Cool. Well, thank you very much.
Trouble, so it's been quite good.
Well, we're going to sign off there, guys. So thank you all for joining us. If there's any questions that you have for Sarah after the call, then post them and we'll make sure Sarah gets them. And then hopefully if she's willing to, then she can give us the reply and we'll post it back. So we hope you've enjoyed it. Lots of love and we'll see you soon.